Hi guys, so today I'm going to just read a little essay about Israel, Palestine and Hamas, what happened on October the 7th. On October 7th, 2023, a massacre was executed by the Hamas Islamic resistance movement against the Jewish people of the State of Israel and against foreign nationals visiting or working in the State of Israel at that time. Hamas is a terrorist organization and its democratically elected governing body of the Palestinian people in the neighboring Palestinian territory of Gaza, also referred to as the Gaza Strip. Around 1,000 Hamas and affiliated terrorists massacred, psychologically tortured, and killed more than 1,200 men, women, children, babies, and pensioners. They sexually abused women and girls and took a further 244 people as hostages. The reason Mohammed Daif, who is the terror group's commander of its military wing, said was to avenge the humiliation and indignities leveled against the Palestinians and Islam by the Israelis. I've just basically paraphrased what he said. He actually set out several things that he felt that the massacre was designed to avenge. Obviously, he's the terror group's commander of the military wing, so he's going to be one of the masterminds behind that massacre. Him and the leader of Hamas, I think his name is Yahya Sinwar. So the Palestinian people have two territories. One is called the West Bank and the other is called the Gaza Strip. And the Jewish people have one territory, which is actually a state, an actual country called the State of Israel. The Palestinian territories, which are not a country, they're just territories, they're not states either, they're just territories, they neighbour the State of Israel on both sides of the country. So with the Gaza Strip on the west side of Israel, and the West Bank is on the east side. So you have basically like a strip of land, and then let's say that whole strip is Israel, bar a little strip on one piece of it, on the west side, and then a bigger sort of like, on a map, it looks like a, I don't know, size of a big ball of bubble gum, let's say, and that area is the West Bank, and the rest of the surrounding area is Israel. So the Israelis and Palestinians are neighbours because Israel, as I just said, is between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It is flanked by the Palestinian territories on both sides of the country. And so they've been neighbours since the three areas of land were won, before they were partitioned and designated accordingly by the United Nations in 1947 to enable the Jews and the Palestinians to each create their own nation state and homeland for their people. This was necessary due to the Holocaust that was perpetrated by Adolf Hitler's Nazi government in the late 1930s to mid-1940s Germany, and which had murdered 6 million Jews simply because they were Jews. In the lead up to and in the aftermath of the Holocaust, many Jews returned to what was now called Palestine, where Jews that had never left the region were still living. Though Hitler and the Nazis surrendered and were defeated by the United States of America, the United Kingdom and Europe and their allies in the Second World War in 1945, the Jews did not have a country of their own due to having been targeted historically with anti-Semitism that had led to their being murdered, expelled, attacked, and exiled from the Middle Eastern countries that they had previously called home and founded and practiced Judaism in. So this anti-Semitism caused some of the Jewish people to migrate out of what was originally the land of Israel, before it became the modern state of Israel in 1948, caused the Jewish people to migrate to countries in and around modern-day Europe, for example, Russia, Poland, Germany, Hungary, Spain, and others. And then the Jews would migrate back to the Middle East when it was safe to do so, or when anti-Semitism resurfaced in the countries that were supposedly hosting them. So therefore, when the United Nations and the British Mandate for Palestine designated one part of what was then called Palestine to the Jewish people in 1947, and two parts to the Palestinian people, who themselves had a historical connection to the land through Islam, but which originated in Saudi Arabia and was approximately 4,000 years shorter in length than the links that the Jewish people have and Judaism have to that region. So the Jewish people formed the State of Israel as their national homeland on the land designated to them by the UN. They then declared independence from the British Mandate for Palestine a year later in 1948, and then went on to develop the international prospects of their newly formed country and became a formidable player and close ally of other democracies on the world stage, including the USA, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. However, the Palestinians did not form a state of Palestine on the land designated to them by the United Nations, so they did not create a national homeland of their own. Therefore, they have never created a country called Palestine. Instead, they refused acceptance of the new realities that the partitioning of the land, the declaration of independence of the State of Israel, and the decision to return the mandate for Palestine by the British created. The terrorist and militant groups formed in the Palestinian territories over the last 70 years mean that the Jewish people are continuously defending themselves and their homeland from the existential threat that is constantly being imposed on them by the terrorist groups. These terrorist groups include the Iran-backed Hamas Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, and its military wing, the Izz al-Din al-Qassam Brigades, both of which are based in Gaza and carried out the 7th of October massacre in the State of Israel. The group Hamas there are additional terrorist factions operating in Gaza and in the West Bank, and I'll come to those in a moment. So Hamas was formed in Gaza in 1988. It was democratically elected by the Palestinians to form a government in 2006. And due to never having held an election for its people since 2006 or 2005, Hamas was still in power in 2023 when it carried out the massacre alongside other terrorist organizations, including the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also based in the Gaza Strip. Jihad meaning Islamic Holy War, and Jihadi meaning Islamic Holy Warrior in that war, or an Islamic Holy Soldier in that war. These Jihad and Jihadi these concepts are an integral part of the ideology of hatred and resistance towards the Jewish people and their homeland and the State of Israel, and its defense of its citizens against the terrorist attack of their neighbors. So this ideology is integral to Hamas and its affiliates and what they do regarding attacking Israel and the Jews. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the second strongest terrorist group in Gaza, and it also participated in the massacre alongside Hamas, as I mentioned earlier. Since it was formed in the 1970s and with the support of Iran, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad has been fighting its jihad, its holy war, or its war in the name of Islam, against Israel and developing its own military capabilities, for example, rockets to target Israel's towns with. So the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is more extremist than Hamas. Another terrorist group, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, is a non-Islamist armed wing of Fatah, which is based in the West Bank and is the largest political party in the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is called the PLO for short. The international representative of the Palestinian people is this organization, and it excludes Hamas. Fatah is led by President Mahmoud Abbas, who, as president of the Palestinian Authority, the PA, continues to call for peace talks with Israel. The United States of America and the United Kingdom are currently backing President Abbas to govern the Gaza Strip in addition to the West Bank that he already controls now, so that he would control both Palestinian territories instead of just the former, as he does now. In the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, the State of Israel captured the two Palestinian territories of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. As a result, most of the West Bank is administered by Israel. 42% of it is ruled by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which has formal responsibility for security in Area A of the West Bank. though due to continued terrorist attacks against Israel from this area, Israeli security forces conduct security operations there. The PA, under President Mahmoud Abbas's leadership, has administrative control, while Israel maintains security control of Area B. The Islamist-leaning members of Fatah established a group called the Popular Resistance Committee, and is probably the third largest armed group in Gaza after Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. All three militant terrorist groups took Israeli hostages during the Hamas massacre on October the 7th, 2023. Fatah factions regularly fight alongside Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank, despite the PRC being in favour of a two-state solution. So none of these groups are controlled by President Mahmoud Abbas. And the Jewish state and its people are understandably concerned that the terror attacks would therefore continue under his presidency, instead of ceasing entirely, as per the imperative for the safety and security of the Jewish people and their homeland. Other Palestinian nationalist terrorist groups include the Islamist-leaning Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which has a track record of terrorizing and attacking Israelis and fighting alongside Hamas in Gaza. The DFLP's secular rival, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, is also based in Gaza and largely operates through its military wing, the Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades. This terrorist group has previously hijacked international airlines and assassinated the Israeli cabinet minister, Rehavam Ze'evi. However, the Palestinian nationalist terrorist groups are different from the Salafi jihadi groups. So we're looking at one set of groups that are Palestinian nationalists and another set of groups that are actually jihadists. So the Salafi jihadists, the goal of the Salafi jihadi groups, like the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, which is also known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, is to establish an extremist Islamic caliphate in the Middle East, if not in the State of Israel, the homeland of the Jewish people. So some of these groups are also based in Gaza, having formed after leaving Hamas due to their perception that its stance towards the State of Israel was actually softening, because Hamas has in the past cooperated with the State of Israel to negotiate ceasefires during previous wars. Some of the Salafi jihadi terrorist groups have members that fought with al-Qaeda against the American troops in Iraq. They call for an Islamic Emirate, a political religious unit or Muslim principality in Gaza, and are influenced by Beit al-Maqdis, the ISIS terrorist group operating in Egypt's Sinai province. While the Salafi jihadis have attacked Israel in the past, they also target Hamas for not imposing Sharia law. Though with Hamas being the strongest terrorist group in Gaza, it has been able to keep them in check while also policing the various other armed factions in order to maintain law and order. I just want to attribute that section on the different terrorist factions to Hugh Lovat, Senior Policy Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at the European Council on Foreign Relations. He wrote that piece for The Times on Saturday, 2nd of December 2023. So that bit about the terrorists, that is paraphrased from his article. Moving on, the goals of the jihadis that are affiliated with Hamas are to win their Islamic holy war by conquering and annihilating the State of Israel, the Jewish people, and their ancient and indigenous Jewish heritage. They want to bring it under full Muslim ownership and control, replace it with an Islamic state, create a majority Muslim population, and impose Sharia law there. It is this ideology that underpinned Hamas's massacre in Israel on October the 7th, and it is written explicitly in the 1998 founding charter document of the Hamas terrorist organization. For example, the preface of the charter contains the following quote from the founder of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is also affiliated with Hamas and the other terrorist factions in the Gaza Strip. It says Israel, quotes, Israel will exist and continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it, end quotes. Article 7 contains the following hadith or saying, quoted from Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Sorry, I just put the light on, it's glaring at me, let me turn it off. Who are considered, so these are considered high authorities on hadith, or, quote, sayings, unquote, of the Prophet Muhammad. So he says, quotes, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, brackets, killing the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, quotes, O Muslims, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. Only the Garkad tree would not do that because it is one of the trees of the Jews, unquotes. Article 8 sets out the Hamas Islamic resistance movement's blueprint for jihadist terrorism as a slogan that states, quotes, Allah is its target, the Prophet is its model, the Quran its constitution, jihad is its path, and death for the sake of Allah is its loftiest wishes, end quotes. So jihad is its path means an Islamic holy war is the path that the organisation is following. So Article 13 sets out Hamas's position regarding peace, and it states, quotes, initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. Abusing any part of Palestine is abuse against part of religion. Nationalism of the Islamic resistance movement is part of its religion. Its members have been fed on that. There is no solution to the Palestinian question except by jihad. All initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are a waste of time and vain endeavours, end quotes. So they're clearly saying that they're not interested in any peace talks. For them, this is an issue of vanity for other people to participate in. They're not interested. And they say abusing any part of Palestine is abuse against part of religion. So here they are implying that Palestine is an Islamic state, and any abuse against Palestine is an offence against Islam, which calls the jihadis. That's a call to action for the jihadis. Because the jihadis are fighting a holy war in the name of Islam. So in other words, they're saying you mess with Palestine, you get the jihadis on your back. The question is, which part of Palestine are we talking about here? Are we talking about the Gaza Strip or the West Bank? Because those are the two Palestinian territories. So it doesn't differentiate between either. Next, Article 22, it says, this is basically an update to the notorious forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And that was a book whose 1905 Russian publication was adapted from an earlier, benign French publication. But this version was adapted to include, the Russian version was adapted to include the Jewish people and blame them for each of the world's ills. This version was favoured by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, who used it to spread anti-Semitic propaganda in the years leading to the Holocaust. So the update in that article, in Article 22 of the founding charter of Hamas, promotes a wide-ranging conspiracy theory that accuses the Jewish people of controlling the world and all its major events, of starting and retaining a financial interest in every war known to man, of building secret networks and amassing disproportionate levels of wealth, and for destroying the Islamic Caliphate and being fully supported by the communist East and the capitalist West, unquotes. So I've basically paraphrased that article, but that is what it's saying. You know, it couldn't get more anti-Semitic than that, and that's, you know, that is behind, that's one of the main conspiracy theories that is circulating on anti-Semitic social media sites, groups and chats, And it's part of the founding charter of the Hamas terrorist organization. So really, you could say that Hamas aligns itself with Nazi ideology 100%, and uses that as energy, if you will, for waging its Islamic holy war. I just have to add here that there are plenty of Muslims who say that Islam is not. It's a faith of peace. It's not a faith of violence. So all of these this jihad ideology is not, like, it's a false interpretation of the Islamic faith. But nonetheless, these terrorists, this is their ideology, and this is what is driving them to try and annihilate Israel. And this is what was behind the massacre on October the 7th in Israel. So moving on to Article 28, it states, quotes, Israel, Judaism and the Jews challenge Islam and the Muslim people. May the cowards never sleep, unquotes. As mentioned earlier, the preface section of the Charter explicitly states, quotes, Israel will exist and continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. So here you have a direct, it's an explicit statement calling out everything that it is to be Jewish, the country, the homeland, the indigenous homeland of the Jews, the faith that was started in the very area that these terrorists want to replace with an Islamic State. Judaism and the Jews challenge Islam and the Muslim people, and then calls them cowards and wishes that they never sleep. I mean, this is just obviously pure hatred, but it's important because it's what's driving them. It's giving them energy. It's fueling their so-called holy war against the state of Israel and the Jews. And it's also important because I'll come to this point that I'm going to make now in another video in more detail, but people who've been protesting in the pro-Palestine movements post-October the 7th massacre, they've been protesting against the way that the state of Israel has been defending itself in the face of the massacre. Some of them, it's evident that, well, they certainly appear to be supporting this ideology that I'm referencing here in the Hamas's founding charter. But like I said, I'll cover that in another video. So moving on to Article 32, this one aligns itself with the ideology of Hitler and the Nazis and says of the Jewish people, quotes, their plan is embodied in the protocols of the elders of Zion, and their present conduct is the best proof of what we are saying, end quotes. So here, another attempt at justifying their anti-Semitic hatred of the Jews and aligning itself with the ideology of Hitler and the Nazis, the Nazi Party, which that ideology under Hitler led to the annihilation of the genocide of 6 million Jews at the Second World War. So that's an example of where the ideology can lead to if it's not combated early enough. So the concluding part of the charter is subheaded, quotes, the Islamic resistance movement is composed of soldiers, end quotes. So the members of Hamas, they're saying clearly here, they are soldiers. Remember, they reference soldiers in relation to jihadi. So they're jihadis. Their members are holy warriors, holy soldiers, fighting the Islamic holy war against the state of Israel. Article 36 is written under the conclusion subheading. It states, quotes, the Hamas Islamic resistance movement and its soldiers, it's in reference to this, it quotes, will only serve as a support for all groupings and organizations operating against the Zionist enemy and its lackeys. The Islamic resistance movement adopts Islam as its way of life. Islam is its creed and religion. Whoever takes Islam as his way of life, be it an organization, a grouping, a country, or any other body, the Islamic resistance movement considers itself as their soldiers and nothing more. This charter, as the founding document of Hamas, is binding on the Palestinian leadership. What we're saying is, this is sort of like, it seems, the way I interpret this Article 36 is that it wants to convert as many people to Islam. The only way people are going to be safe is if they convert to Islam. That's what that message says. So it seems to also imply if the state of Israel were to convert to Islam, they would no longer be at risk of being annihilated. So that is what Article 36 is about. So just moving on, this charter, as the founding document of Hamas, is binding on the Palestinian leadership. The latest output underpinned by this charter was the October 7th massacre, masterminded and led by Yahweh's Sinwar and Mohammed Daif. Yahweh, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, please forgive me. I'm just recalling it from my memory, and my memory is not the greatest, but Yahweh Sinwar, he is the leader of Hamas, and then Mohammed Daif is the commander of Hamas's military wing. So those two masterminded the massacre. Some Palestinians and their supporters are members of Hamas or of affiliated terrorist groups with either the same or more extreme ideology, for example, Islamic Jihad, Fatah, Hezbollah, and others, and they fully subscribe to the charter that I've just talked through. So many political leaders and influencers in the non-democratic countries publicly declared or initiated public support for Hamas and its massacre. These include Lebanon's anti-Israel terrorist group Hezbollah, Fatah leader Jibril Rajoub, Turkish President Erdogan, who is said to be providing refuge for Hamas members as the State of Israel's military defense campaign seeks to eliminate them, and Turkish President Erdogan has refused to identify Hamas as a terrorist group. Just to put it in context, I think Turkey has a majority Muslim population. So in saying what he's said, the Turkish president has made clear who he is allied with, and in this case it's with Hamas and its affiliates. So President Putin of Russia made his support for Hamas clear in the days following the massacre when he compared the Jewish state's actions to those of Nazi Germany, when he compared calls for a blockade of the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip to, quotes, the siege of Leningrad during World War II, end quotes. And this implied Israel's actions were comparable to those of the Nazis, which of course they're not. But Israel has not annihilated 6 million Palestinians because they're Palestinians, and it hasn't done that in the most grotesque way ever imaginable. Israel has not done this, okay? So there's absolutely no way of comparing the two. So for Putin to say that, I think he's just being a little dramatic. Moving on, although Putin supported Israel's right to defend itself from an attack unprecedented in its cruelty, quote unquote, he later vetoed an American proposal at the UN Security Council to condemn Hamas. So Biden wanted to set it in stone that Hamas is our enemy, the enemy of the allies, and they are a terrorist organization, but Putin used Russia's vote to veto that proposal. So it was not able to clear. The resolution did not stand at the UN Security Council. So his ally, Putin's ally China, also vetoed the American proposal, and Israel was later found to have been deleted from the maps on major Chinese websites. So it's clear where China stands in the Israel-Hamas war. It stands with Hamas and the others who stand with Hamas. Their mutual ally, President Raisi of Iran, home to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is thought to have planned the massacre with members of Hezbollah and Hamas, he urged Muslim countries to join the attacks on the State of Israel and praised, quotes, resistance efforts by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, end quotes. Some Iranians were filmed celebrating, quotes, the success of the Al-Aqsa storm operation in Palestine, end quotes, in Iran's parliament in Tehran on October the 8th. Tehran is Iran's capital. So this is Iranian lawmakers or MPs, members of parliament, filmed celebrating the Hamas massacre in Israel. And that they were filmed celebrating it on October the 8th in Parliament. So it's very clear where Iran stands. If there was ever any doubt, it's now very, very clear that Iran fully backs Hamas. And part of the reason it fully backs it is because it's partly funding it. I think Hamas has quite a number of people funding it, providing arms and helping to coordinate attacks and helping plan them. And Iran is most certainly one of them. So Iran stands with Putin, Erdogan, and the others that support Hamas. So looking into the democratic countries who supported Hamas post-October the 7th, the leader of Ireland's Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald, publicly declared her support for Hamas. Nihad Awad, the co-founder and executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE for short, a major American Muslim civil rights organization that advised the White House until he publicly declared his support for Hamas, when he said of its October 7th massacre in Israel, quotes, "Yes, I was happy to see people breaking the siege, the walls of the concentration camp, and throwing down the shackles of their own land and walking free into their land that they were not allowed to walk in," end quotes. So what he's talking about here, he's making several inflammatory comments. So he's referencing the concentration camp, breaking free of that. So presumably the situation in the Gaza Strip where Israel has to have a presence because of how often and determinedly Palestinian nationalists and Palestinian Islamic jihadis are sending rockets into Israel and terrorizing the Jewish people there, and not just the Jewish people, but the foreign nationals that visit there and work there as well, and sending suicide bombers into Israel to create hell. So he's referencing that security situation there, which is absolutely necessary for Israel to defend itself and keep these terrorists out of Israel. The Israelis just want to get on with their lives. They just want to get on and be competitive in the world, prosper, be happy, and it's difficult to do when you've got this neighboring territory that is intent on annihilating you and has a founding document infused or instilled with terrorist ideology and anti-Semitic ideology in it. So he's talked about the concentration camps. I mean, look, so the security situation in the Gaza Strip is 100% different to what a concentration camp was in Nazi Germany. It's an absolutely disgusting analogy to make, and it just really shows his ignorance. I mean, he's probably never even been to Auschwitz or anything like that to learn and study what happened, what the Nazis did to the Jews on the concentration camps. He's never done that. And if he had, he wouldn't draw a parallel between the situation in the Gaza Strip and the concentration camp. There's just not comparable. And then he talks about throwing down the shackles of their own land and walking free into their land that they were not allowed to walk in. Whose land is it? The State of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. It's official now. I mean, it was always the case 4,800 years ago when the monarchs ruled the area, and the Jewish monarchs, and the Jewish people that ruled it after the monarchs. It's always the case. Now it's the case again. It's not Palestine, and you can't just sort of like delete the reality around that. You can't just delete it and say, no, it's Palestine. State of Israel never happened. And that's what he's trying to do there. So that is a really inflammatory thing to say for a person in his position. Remember, he is the co-founder and executive of the Council of American Islamic Relations, and he was advising the Biden administration prior to making these comments. So he was an enemy behind a smile, if you will. He clearly does not recognize this. It doesn't acknowledge the legitimacy of the state of Israel, and someone like that should not be advising the President of the United States, let alone be in a position where he can preach his hate to a huge American Muslim audience. Moving on, Nihad made these comments at a conference hosted by American Muslims for Palestine, where audience members cheered him on. He continued, quotes, "Yes, the people of Gaza have the right to self-defense, have the right to defend themselves. Yes, Israel as an occupying power does not have that right to self-defense," end quotes. He made no mention of Hamas, therefore his comments conflated the Hamas terrorist group and their affiliates with ordinary Palestinian citizens living in Gaza. He went on to espouse more anti-Semitic ideology consistent with the spirit of the founding charter of the Hamas terror group, when he said, quotes, "AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and its affiliates have been controlling the United States government and the United States Congress. Unless we free Congress, we will not be able to free Palestine." And that quote I read in the Jewish Insider, where the Middle East Media Research Institute did a report for the Jewish Insider newspaper, and that's where I got that from. So he's perpetrating an anti-Semitic trope that Jews control the world, and here they are controlling America. How did a person like him ever get to be in a position to preach this to the public? I mean, in a way, maybe it's a good thing that he's preaching it to the public, because at least we know he exists. If he was publishing it in behind an avatar that obscures his identity, we may never know that he was doing this stuff. And this is how anti-Semitic movements foment, is between, in conversations that often take place in private to begin with. So that's what that was his contribution. Nihad Awad is clearly pro-Hamas. Moving on, some supporters of Hamas and their affiliates in the pro-Palestine movements across the world who are not of the Islamic faith, particularly in the liberal democracies such as the USA, the UK and the EU, subscribe to the anti-Semitic ideology of the Hamas Charter and are content to coalesce alongside people who are members of the Islamic faith and subscribe to the Charter. This is evident from the placards that were on display at the pro-Palestine protests that were quickly convened when the Jewish people and the State of Israel conducted its military defense campaign in response to the Hamas massacre, and in the days following, Israel's response publicly called for a day of rage and urged Muslims around the world to stage mass protests against Israel in response. That call to action was heeded, and the millions of people who marched in protest of Israel's defense campaign and in support of Hamas, many expressed anti-Semitic ideology consistent with that expressed in the Hamas Charter and by other terrorist groups such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. For example, quotes, "Free Palestine from the river to the sea," end quotes, quotes, "Exist, resist, return," end quotes, quotes, "By any means necessary," end quotes, and quotes, "Keep the world clean of Jews," end quotes. As neighbours, the State of Israel, the Jewish people, the Palestinians, Hamas and the Gaza Strip are separated by just a 200-metre high sea barrier designed to stop terrorists entering Israel from the Strip via the Mediterranean Sea to terrorise and murder in the Jewish state. Between 1993 and 2008, Palestinian terrorist groups, including Hamas, Palestine, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and other pro-Palestinian terrorist groups were responsible for 109 male and female suicide bombing attacks that killed 558 Israelis and wounded many more. In 2019, Israel's Internal Security Service, the Shin Bet, foiled 10 suicide bombings, and the Israeli Defense Forces discovered and destroyed a Hamas naval terror tunnel and killed 5 Hamas naval commandos as they were trying to infiltrate a kibbutz named Zikim. This persuaded the Israeli government that a sea barrier was needed to keep out terrorist groups trying to enter the State of Israel via the Mediterranean Sea. On October 7th, Hamas breached the security fence by land and by air and massacred, mutilated, tortured and sexually abused and murdered 1,200 people in the State of Israel and took a further 244 as hostages, as I mentioned earlier. Many were Jewish, others were foreign nationals simply visiting or working in Israel at the time. All were innocent people going about their everyday lives. When the Jewish state launched its military defense campaign against Hamas in the days following the massacre, the IDF discovered a 300-mile network of tunnels constructed by Hamas for the purpose of planning, preparing and coordinating terrorist attacks on the State of Israel and equipping themselves with munitions, e.g. rockets and rocket launchers, for that purpose. In keeping with its founding charter, Hamas has since said that the October 7th massacre was, quotes, a rehearsal, quotes, and the Al-Qassam brigades have said there will be more such events to follow. As has been seen in this video, the goal of Hamas and its supporters is to continue their jihad, execute their mission to conquer, destroy and replace the State of Israel, the Jewish people and their indigenous ancient heritage that is inextricably attached to the land of Israel, with an Islamic State, Caliphate or Emirate of Palestine that stretches from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea and impose Sharia law. And in order for a Palestine to stretch from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that means the State of Israel cannot, in order for that to happen, the State of Israel would have to be deleted. So this is the threat that is posed by Hamas terrorists and their affiliates. And this is why the State of Israel, President Netanyahu, the Israeli Defense Forces and the Jewish people are doing everything they can to eliminate Hamas in order to try and preserve their security and the safety of their state, the safety of their home, in order to keep their home free from terrorism and free from threats of terrorism. So that's all for now. I will be making this into a bigger video at some point. When I say bigger, I mean one that has lots of images to illustrate and so on. But I'll keep you posted about that. But thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.